I feel as if when I discovered Rupert Sheldrake's work that I had the same kind of reaction. I wanted to open up a bottle of champagne because it was like, wow, I thought the sciences were dull and boring and weren't making a lot of progress. I think part of the reason why I never even attempted to go into the scientific enterprise myself was because as I grew up, I found that science seemed to be this dull, boring process and they weren't asking really interesting questions. And so I moved more towards philosophy where I felt like I could be more free to ask those important questions. But when I discovered Rupert Sheldrake, I had that very same reaction, which was like, wow, this guy has suddenly opened up a whole new world of inquiry that I thought was sort of closed off eternally to us and that we had sort of
Mhm.
done away with. In particular, he says that there are sort of 10 tenets of the scientific worldview which make up the ideology of materialism. Now, we're not going to probably work through all of these tenets here today because that would take many, many hours of conversation. And by the way, I don't think either of us are qualified to do so, at least with only each other to count on. That being said, I want to just go over the list real quick so that everybody is clear as to what Rupert Sheldrake's criticisms of the ideology of materialism, what he's calling the ideology of materialism, are, and then we can start moving forward from there. So, number one, everything is essentially mechanical. This is the belief that basically everything that we know about the world can be reduced down into very clear mechanistic processes. This goes all the way back to Descartes when we're thinking about the origins of such an idea. Number two, all matter is unconscious. Number three, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same, excepting for the Big Bang. Okay, so this is thermodynamics, and we have the Big Bang here as the sort of exception. You know, if you get the turtles all the way down question going, it always ends back at the Big Bang. Well, what happened before that? Well, there was some big explosion and everything came into being all at once, including all of the matter and energy. It's not really an answer. It's more like a non-answer. Number four, the laws of nature are fixed. That is, they
Mhm.
are stable and they unchanging over all time. Now, again, there's people who are getting up in their seats right now and ready to turn this podcast off. We're not going to be dealing with all of these questions today, but I just wanted to again outline his criticisms of what he calls the materialist ideology and give you some food for thought about whether or not these are assumptions that we should just take on their face and whether or not they have in fact been proven by science. I know a number of people who call themselves, empirical, scientifically minded materialists, and yet they don't seem to have, in many cases, the thought through many of these questions, or even really. In some cases, have the training to even assess them properly. Number five, nature is purposeless. That is, evolution has no goal or direction, no telos. We are going to be getting into that one today. All be up. Number six, all biological inheritance is material, that is, it is carried in the DNA and other material structures. That one we might also be touching on as well. Minds are number seven. Minds are inside heads and nothing but the activities of brains. Okay, so we have the hard problem of consciousness that's been as yet unresolved for centuries now, and one of the things that we know for sure is that we're conscious. We don't know necessarily about a lot of other things, but we know that we have minds. And so one of the assumptions here, one of the core assumptions, according to Rupert Sheldrake and his ideology of materialism, is that minds are inside heads and nothing but the activities of brains. That is, they are reducible again to those physical interactions inside of the brain. Number eight, memories are stored as material traces and in brains and are wiped out at death. Okay, so that's another thing that's been a real big problem, not only in cognitive science but also in aspects of computer science. We haven't been able to really figure out where are memories stored. Are they sort of made up of the networks between neurons? Is there like are they localized in a certain portion of the brain? Does it happen because certain parts of the brain are communicating with one another? We haven't actually gotten as clear on that as you might think. Number nine, unexplained phenomena, i.e., telepathy, are illusory. This is one that I'm very excited to get into, although I have some reservations about whether or not we should, whether or not it might be prudent to do so. But that's number nine. Number 10, mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. Now,
Mm,
this one, I actually don't know why he included this as the 10th assumption, particularly just because it's so specific about medicine here. And this one is very, very dangerous, I would say, if it's taken the wrong way. Of course, right now there has been a rise in popularity in alternative methods of healing, alternative methods of knowing, alternative methods of various kinds of woo-woo type type theories about medicine. And of course, while we're in the middle of this pandemic, that's been a huge question for all of us. Is the soundness of our medicine and issues around quackery in medicine and homeopathy and other things like that. But he's putting that as his number 10 assumption. So, given those 10 assumptions, those are what Rupert Sheldrake uh, posits as the 10 tenets of the scientific worldview that make up the ideology of materialism. I know I just gave you a lot to process there, Cody. I want to just start with that. What do you think of that list?
I mean, it's really interesting. Um, Kind of what you said is that most people don't consider what's on the list is what's critical there. Um, you know, Probably when he wrote that list, and I have to imagine it was, you can see like parts of his thinking from, he has this idea of morphic resonance,
Yes, we're going to get
that
into that.
okay, yeah, that there's like a physical inheritance that is non biological, non environmental. It is physics based in a sense. Um, you can see a lot of like the attitudes in that. I think the medicine one is really interesting because while that one might be rather controversial, it's easily his most falsifiable one. It's one that we already know is pretty much patently true. Um, we know, for example, about cultural illnesses that don't exist in other cultures, about how people really can have spells cast on them by other tribes, and they can only be cured by a shaman, something in which you go into these tribes and you try and come up with a mechanistic explanation. You know, you give them malaria pills or you give them some kind of medicine, it doesn't work, and you really do have to appeal to these kind of cultural forms of healing to deal with them.
Do you
Yeah,
sorry, do you have a specific example of that? And then I have a follow-up question to that as well, just to sketch it out a little bit more clearly.
yeah. I don't have a specific example. This is something that's documented in medical anthropology quite frequently
Mm-hmm.
about people getting ill because of spells or because they simply believe they have spells. Um, there are all kinds of different factors leading to someone whether or not they're going to get better from an illness or disease. One of which is the idea that they know that there's a cure. That, for instance, is something enough for many scenarios for someone's immune system bolstered up to feel better, to do better. Um, and it works in all kinds of cultural cases in which the disease is not apparent. It's a cultural disease. In a sense, it's almost magic. It's not literally magic, but it is in their cultural system magic, and it's working in that way. And it has to have these kind of culture specific cures. Yeah, I don't have a specific citation for that, but it's quite common.
Well, so I think the most obvious objection here would be that this is some sort of psychosomatism, right?
Hmm.
And now, the fact that it could be psychosomatic doesn't actually negate necessarily the claim that these things are, let's say, extra mechanistic. It
Hmm.
just simply means that there's something going on in the brain that's related to their physiological health that we don't quite understand. And of
Hmm.
course, there is also the phenomena of society or cultural wide contagion. That is, certain diseases that pop up that don't have any real physical basis as far as we understand it, but are sort of appear as kind of miasmas as a result of certain cultural conditioning or thinking that's attendant to that age. That as well, I think, would fall under this category of sort of a kind of medicine that is not quite mechanistic, or at least not able to be understood in those terms.
Yeah.